Weep with me, ye daughters of Astarte, and all ye lovers of Tammuz. Did your heart melt and rise and run blood tears? For he who is made of gold and ivory is no more. In the dark forest the boar overcame him, and the tufts of the boar pierced his flesh, and now he lies stained with the leaves of yesteryear. And no longer shall his footsteps wake the seeds that sleep in the bosom of spring. And his voice shall not come with the dawn to my window, and I shall be forever alone. Weep with me, ye daughters of Astarte, and all ye lovers of Tammuz, for my beloved has escaped me. He who spoke as the rivers speak, he whose voice and time were twins, he whose mouth was a red pain made sweet, and on whose lips gall would turn to honey. Weep with me, ye daughters of Astarte, and all ye lovers of Tammuz. Weep with me as the stars weep around his bier, as the moon petals fall upon his wounded body. Wet with your tears the silken covers of my bed, where my beloved once lie in my dreams, and was gone away in my awakening. I charge ye, daughters of Astarte, and all ye lovers of Tammuz, to bear your breath and weep and comfort me, for Jesus of Nazareth is dead.
I did not understand the meaning of his discourses or his parables until he was no longer among us. Nay, I did not understand until his words took living forms before my eyes and fashioned themselves into bodies that walk in the procession of my own day. Let me tell you this. On a night as I sat in my house pondering and remembering his words and his deeds, that I might inscribe them in a book, 3 thieves entered my house. And though I knew they came to rob me of my goods, I was too mindful of what I was doing to meet them with the sword, or even to say, "What do you here?" But I continued writing my remembrances of the Master. And after the thieves had gone, then I remembered his saying, "He who would take your cloak, let him take your other cloak also." And I understood. As I sat recording his words, no man could have stopped me, even were he to have carried away all my possessions. For though I would guard my possessions, and also my person, I know where lies the greater treasure.
My son was my first and my only born. He labored in our field and was contented until he heard the man called Jesus speaking to the multitudes. Then my son suddenly became different, as if some new spirit, foreign and unwholesome, had embraced his spirit. He abandoned the field and the garden, and he abandoned me. He became worthless, a creature of the highways. That Jesus of Nazareth was evil. For what good man would separate a son from his mother? The last thing my child said to me was this: I am going with one of his disciples to the North Country. My life is established on the Nazarene. You have given me birth, and for that I am grateful to you. But I needs must go. Am I not leaving you with all our rich land and all our silver and gold? I will take naught but this garment and this staff. Thus spoke my son and departed. Now, the priests and the Romans have laid hold on Jesus and have crucified him. And they have done well. A man who would part mother and son could not be godlike. The man who sends our children into the cities of the Gentiles cannot be our friend. I know I will not see my son again. I could tell by his eyes. And for this, I hate Jesus of Nazareth. For he has caused me to be alone in this unplowed field and this withered garden. A few days ago, they told that Jesus once said, "My Father and my mother and my brethren are those who hear my word and follow me." But why should a son leave his mother and follow in his footsteps? And why should the milk of my breast be forgotten for some fountain yet untasted, and the warmth of my arms be forsaken for the North Country, so cold and unfriendly? I hate Jesus of Nazareth, and I will hate him until the last of my days. For he has robbed me of my firstborn, my only son.
I was a stranger in Jerusalem. I had come to the holy city to behold the great temple and to sacrifice upon the altar. For my wife had given twin sons to my tribe. And after I had made my offerings, I had stood in the portico of the temple, looking down upon the money changers and those who sold doves for sacrifice, and listening to the great noise in the court. And as I stood there, came of a sudden a man into the midst of the money changers and those who sold doves. He was a man of majesty. He came swiftly. In his hand, he held a rope of goat's hide, and he began to overturn the tables of the money changers and to beat the peddlers of the birds with the rope. And I heard him saying in a loud voice, "Render these birds unto the sky, which is their nest." Men and women fled from before his face as he moved amongst them, as the whirling wind moves on the sandhills. And all this came to pass, but in a moment. And then, the court of the temple was emptied of the money changers. Only the man stood there alone, and his followers at a distance. Then I turned my face, and I saw another man standing in the temple. And I walked towards him, and I said, "Sir, who is this man who stands alone, even like another temple?" And he answered me, "This is Jesus of Nazareth, a prophet who has appeared of late in Galilee. Here in Jerusalem, all men hate him." And I said, my heart was strong enough to be with his whip, yet yielding enough to be at his feet. And as Jesus turned towards his followers who were awaiting him, 3 of the temple doves flew back, and one alighted upon his left shoulder, and the other 2 at his feet. And he touched each one tenderly. And as he walked on, there were leagues in every step of his steps. Now tell me, what power had he to attack and disperse hundreds of men and women without opposition? They told me they all hate him, yet no one stood before him on that day. Had he plucked out the fangs of hate on his way to the court of the temple?
After he was taken, they entrusted him to me. I was ordered by Pontius Pilate to keep him in custody until the following morning. And my soldiers led him prisoner, and he was obedient to them. After midnight, I left my wife and children and visited the arsenal. It was a habit to go about and see that all was well with the battalions in Jerusalem, and that night I visited the arsenal where he was held. My soldiers and some of the young Jews were making sport of him. They had torn his garment off, and they had put a crown above his head of last year's brow thorns. They had seated him against the pillar, and they were dancing and screaming before him. And they had given him a reed to hold in his hand. As I entered, someone shouted, "Behold, O Captain, the King of Jews!" And I stood before him and I looked at him. I was ashamed. I knew not why. I had fought in Gallia and in Spain, and with my men I had faced death. Yet never had I been in fear nor been a coward. But when I looked at that man, and he looked at me, I lost all heart. It seemed as though my lips were sealed. I could utter no word. And straightway I left the arsenal. That chanced 30 years ago. My sons, who were babes then, are men now. And now they are serving Caesar in Rome. But often in counseling them I have spoken of him. A man facing death with the sap of life upon his lips and with the compassion for his slayers in his eyes. And now I am old. I have lived the years fully. And I think truly that neither Pompey nor Caesar is so great a commander as that man of Gallia. For since his unresisting death, an army has risen out of the earth to fight for him. And he is better served, though, by them dead, Then Pompey or Caesar was served by them, no living.
His disciples are dispersed. He gave them a legacy of pain. Ere he himself was put to death, they are hunted like the deer and the foxes of the field, and the quiver of the hunter is yet full of arrows. But when they are caught, they are joyous, and their faces gleam like the face of the bridegroom at the wedding feast. For he gave them also the legacy of joy. I had a friend from the North Country, and his name was Stephen. And because he preached Jesus as the Son of God, he was led to the marketplace and stoned. And when Stephen fell to earth, he outstretched his arms as if he would die as his master had died. And when the last gleam of light was fading from his eyes, with my own eyes, I saw a smile upon his lips. A smile like that of the breath that comes before the end of winter, for a pledge and a promise of spring. How shall I describe it? It seemed that Stephen was saying, if I should go to another world, and other men should lead me to another marketplace to stone me, even then I would proclaim him for the truth that was in him, and for that same truth that is in me now. And I noticed a man standing near, looking with pleasure upon the stoning of Stephen. His name was Saul of Tarsus. And it was he who had yielded Stephen to the priests and the Romans and the crowd for stoning. Saul was bald of head and short of stature. His shoulders were crooked, and his features ill-sorted, and I liked him not. But I was told, a day after Stephen's death, he was preaching Jesus from the housetops. It is hard to believe. But the grave halts not Jesus walking to the enemy's camp to tame and conquer those who had opposed him. Still, I do not like that man of Tarsus. Even though I had been told that he had been tamed and conquered on the road to Damascus, his head is too large for his heart to be that of a true disciple. And yet perhaps I am mistaken. I am often mistaken.
Once again, I say that with death, Jesus conquered death, and he rose from the grave a spirit and a power. And he walked in our solitude, and he visited the gardens of our passions. We who love him beheld him with these our eyes, which he made to see, and we touched him with these our hands, which he taught to reach forth. He lies not there in the cleft rock behind the stone. I know you who believe not in him. I was one of you, and you are many, but your number shall be diminished. Must you break your harp and your lyre to find the music therein? Must you fell a tree ere you can believe that it bears fruit? You hate Jesus because someone from the North Country said he was the Son of God. But you hate one another because each of you deems himself too great to be the brother of the next man. You hate him because someone said He was born of a virgin and not of man's seed. But you know not the mothers who go to the tomb in virginity, nor the men who go down into the grave choked with their own thirst. You know not that earth was given to the Son in marriage, and that earth it is that sends us forth into the mountain and the desert. There is a gulf that yawns between those who love him and those who hate him, those who believe and those who do not believe. But when the years have bridged that gulf, you will know that he who lived in us is deathless. And he was the Son of God, as we are the children of God. And he was born of a virgin, as we are born of the husbandless earth. It is passing strange that earth gives not to the unbelievers the roots to suck at her breast, nor the wings wherewith to fly high and drink, and be filled with the dews of her space. But I know what I know, and it is enough.
This day I heard Saul of Tarsus preaching the Christ unto the Jews of this city. He calls himself Paul now, apostle to the Gentiles. I knew him in my youth, and in those days he persecuted the friends of the Nazarene. Well do I remember his satisfaction when his fellows stoned that radiant youth, Stephen. This Paul is indeed a strange man. His soul is not the soul of a free man. At times, he seems like an animal in the forest, hunted and wounded, seeking a cave wherein he would hide his pain from the world. He speaks not of Jesus, nor does he address his words. He preaches the Messiah, whom the prophets of old had foretold. And though he is a learned Jew, he addresses his fellow Jews in Greek, and his Greek is haltering, and he ill chooses his words. But he is a man of hidden powers, and his presence is affirmed by those who gather round him. And at times, he assures them of what he himself is not assured. Those of us who knew Jesus and heard his discourses say he taught man to break the chains of bondage that he might be freed from his yesterdays. But Paul is forging chains for the man of tomorrow. He would strike with his own hammer upon the anvil in the name of one he does not even know. The Nazarene taught us to live each hour in passion and ecstasy. But the man of Tarsus would have us be mindful of laws recorded in the ancient books. Jesus gave his breath to the breathless dead. And in my lone nights, I believe and I understand. He spoke stories that gave happiness to the feasters and spiced with his joy the meat and the wine. But Paul would prescribe our cup and our loaf. Suffer me now to turn my eyes the other way.
I was walking with my maidens in the groves outside of Jerusalem when I saw him with a few men and women sitting about him. And he was speaking to them in a language which I only half understood. But one needs not a language to perceive a pillar of light or a mountain of crystal. heart knows what the tongue may never utter, and the ears may never hear. And he was speaking to his friends of love and strength. I know he spoke of love because there was melody in his voice. And I know he spoke of strength because there were armies in his gestures. And he was tender, though my own husband could not have spoke with such authority. As I was passing by him, he stopped speaking for a moment and looked kindly upon me. And I was humbled. And I knew in my soul I had passed by a God. After that day, his image visited my privacy, when I would not be visited by man or woman. And his eyes searched my soul when my own eyes were closed. And his voice governs the stillness of my nights. I am held fast forevermore, and there is peace in my pain and freedom in my tears. Oh, beloved friend, oh, you have never seen this man, and you never will. He has gone beyond our senses, but of all men, he is now the nearest to me.
They say that Jesus of Nazareth was humble and meek. They say that though he was a just man and righteous, that he is a weakling, and that he was often confounded by the strong and the powerful, and that when he stood before men of authority, he was but a lamb among the lions. But I say that Jesus had authority over men, and that he knew his power, and that he proclaimed it among the hills of Galilee, and in the cities of Judea and Phoenicia. What man, meek and lowly, would say, I am in life, and I am the way to truth? What man, yielding and soft, would say, I am in God our Father, and our God, the Father, is within me? What man uncertain of tomorrow would proclaim, your world shall pass away and be naught but scattered ashes ere my words shall pass away? Was he doubtful of himself when he said to those who would confound him with a harlot, he who is without sin, let him cast the first stone? Did he fear authority when he drove the money changers from the courts of the temple, though they were licensed by the priests? Were his wings shorn when he cried aloud, my kingdom is above your earthly kingdom? Was he seeking shelter in words when he said again and yet again, destroy this temple, and I shall rebuild it in 3 days? Was it a coward who shook his hand in the face of the authorities and pronounced them low, liars, filthy, and degenerate? Shall a man bold enough to say these things to those who ruled Judea be deemed meek and humble? Nay, the eagle builds not his nest in the weeping willow, and the lion seeks not his den among the ferns. And the bow within me rises and stirs when I hear the weak speak of Jesus as humble and meek to justify their own meekness. And when they speak of him as a coward, shining like a worm by their side. Yea, my heart is sickened by such men. For it is the mighty hunter I would preach, and the mountainous spirit unconquerable.
I cannot tell the fate of this man, nor can I say what shall befall his disciples. A seed hidden in the heart of an apple is an orchard invisible. Yet should that seed fall upon a rock, it will come to naught. But this I say, the ancient God of Israel is harsh and relentless. Israel should have another God, one whom is gentle and forgiving, who would look down upon them with pity, one who would descend with the rays of the sun and walk on the path of their limitations rather than sit forever in the judgment seat to weigh their faults and measure their wrongdoings. Israel should bring forth a God whose heart is not a jealous heart and whose memory of their shortcomings is brief. One who would not avenge himself upon them even to the third and fourth generation. Man here in Syria is like man in all lands. He will look into the mirror of his own understanding and therein find his deity. He would fashion the gods after his own likeness and worship that which reflects his own image. In truth, man prays to his deeper longing that it will rise and fulfill the sum of his desires. There is no depth beyond the soul of man, and the soul is the deep that calls onto itself. For there is no other voice to speak and no other ears to hear. Even we in Persia would see our faces in the discs of the sun and our bodies dancing in the fire that we kindle upon the altars. Now the God of Jesus, whom he called Father, would not be a stranger unto the people of Jesus, and he would fulfill their desires. The gods of Egypt have cast off their burden of stone and fled to the Nubian desert to be free among those who are free from knowing. The gods of Greece and Rome are vanishing into their own sunset. They were too much like men to live in the ecstasy of men. The groves in which their magic was born has been cut down by the axes of the Athenians and the Alexandrians. And in this land, also the high places are made low by the lawyers of Beirut and the young hermits of Antioch. Only the old women and the weary men seek the temples of their forefathers. Only the exhausted at the end of the road seek its beginning. But this man, Jesus, this Nazarene, he has spoken of a God too vast to be unlike the soul of any man, too knowing to punish, and too loving to remember the sins of his creatures. And this God of the Nazarene shall pass over the children of the earth, and he shall sit at their hearth, and he shall be the blessings in their walls and the light upon their path. But my God is the God of Zoroaster, the God who is the sun in the sky and the fire upon the earth and the light that is the bosom in man. And I am content. I need no other God.
They released me and chose him. He rose and I fell down.
I was freed from my chains, and I walked with the throng behind him. But I was a living man, going to my own grave. I should have fled to the desert, where shame is burned out by the sun. Yet I walked with those who chose him to bear my crime. When he was nailed on his cross, I stood there. I saw and I heard, but I seemed outside my body. The thief who was crucified at his right side said to him, "Are you bleeding with me, even you, Jesus of Nazareth?" And Jesus answered and said, "Were it not for the nail that stays my hand, I would reach forth and clasp your hand." We are crucified together. Would they had raised your cross nearer to mine. Then he looked down and gazed upon his mother and a young man who was standing beside her. He said, "Mother, behold, your son standing beside you. Woman, behold, a man who shall carry my drops of blood to the north country." And then he heard the wailing of this woman of Galilee, and he said, "Behold, they weep, and I thirst. I will not take vinegar and gall to quench this thirst." Then he opened his eyes wide to the sky, and he said, "Father, why hast thou forsaken us?" Then he said in compassion, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." When he uttered these words, methought I saw all men prostrate before God, beseeching forgiveness for the crucifixion of this one man. Then again, he said in a great voice, "Father, into thy hand I yield back my spirit." And at last, he raised his head and he said, "Now it is finished." But only on this hill. Then lightning cracked the dark sky, and there was a great thunder. I know now that those who slew him in my stead achieved my endless torment. His crucifixion endured but for an hour, but I shall be crucified unto the end of my years.
He was of the rabble, a brigand, a mountebank, and a self-trumpeter. He appealed only to the unclean and the disinherited. And for this, he had to go the way of the tainted and defiled. He made sport of us and of our laws. He mocked at our honor and jeered at our dignity. He even said he would destroy the temple and desecrate the holy place. He was shameless, and for this he had to die a shameful death. He was a man of Galilee of the Gentiles, an alien from the north country, where Adonis and Ashtart still claim power over Israel and the God of Israel. He whose tongue halted when he spoke the speech of our prophets, was loud and ear-splitting when he spoke the vulgar language of the low-born and the vulgar. What else did I have to do but to declare his death? Am I not a guardian of the temple? Am I not a keeper of the law? Could I have turned my back on him when he said in all tranquility, he is a madman among madmen? For the mad and the crazed and those possessed with devils, shall they not be in the path of Israel? Could I have turned a deaf ear when he said to us that we were vipers, wolves, and sons of vipers? Nay, I could not turn my back and be a deaf ear unto that. For he was not a madman. He was self-possessed. And in his big-sounding sanity, he mocked and challenged us all. For this, I had him crucified. And his crucifixion was a signal and a warning unto the others possessed of the same damned seal. I know well I have been blamed for this, even by those who are the elders of the Sanhedrin. But I am mindful then, as I am mindful now, that one man should die for the people, rather than the people be led astray by one man. Judah was conquered from without. I shall see to it that Judah will never again be conquered from within. No man from this cursed north shall reach our Holy of Holies, nor lay his shadow across the ark of the covenant.
When Jesus spoke, the world was hushed to listen. His words were not for our ears, but rather for the elements of which God made the earth. He spoke to the sea, our vast mother that gave us life. He spoke to the mountain, our elder brother, whose summit is a promise. And he spoke to the angels beyond the sea and the mountain, to whom we entrusted our dreams. Ere the clay in us was made hardened in the sun. And still his speech slumbers within our breast like a love song half forgotten. And sometimes it burns itself through to our memory. His speech was simple and joyous, and the sound of his voice was like cool water in a land of a drought. Once he raised his hand against the skies. His fingers were like the branches of a sycamore tree. And he said with a great voice, the prophets of old have spoken to you, and your voice is filled your ears. But I say unto you, empty your ears of what you have heard. And these words of Jesus, but I say unto you, were not spoken by a man of our race, nor of our world, but rather a host of seraphim marching across the skies of Judea. Again and yet again, he would quote the law and the prophets, and then he would say, but I say unto you. Oh, what burning words, what waves of seas unknown to the shores of our minds. But I say unto you, again and yet again, what stars seeking the darkness of the souls, what sleepless souls awaiting the dawn. To tell us the story of Jesus, one must needs have his speech or the echo thereof. I have neither the speech nor the echo. I beg you to forgive me for beginning a story that I cannot end. But the end is not yet upon my lips. It is but a love song in the wind.
Subhanallah walhamdulillah wa la